Good to see you, everyone. My name is Robbie Howell. Discussions of Mesoamerica very often focus on what is now central Mexico. The Aztecs, the Zapotecs, the Mixtecs, the various Tecs of all sorts of shades and stripes, but less often do people venture southeast into the Yucatan and surrounding areas where dwell the many different Maya peoples, all of whom are currently crammed in-game into one silly civilization. And in this build, I intend to begin fixing that. Today, we will be discussing one of the most noteworthy Maya peoples, whose influence ranged from the early classical era all the way up to the Spanish invasion of the New World. Yes, today we will be covering the CHONTALS, which I have classified as an archer civilization. Of note, this build would not be possible without the help of my fantastic Mesoamerican consultant, Amiki. You have seen him before and you will see him again. He has been a huge asset to my work in Mesoamerica, and without him, this and many other videos would be way less authentic and might not have been able to happen in the first place. So, Amiki, we salute you. And as always, thanks to my mod squad for their consultancy on bonus feasibility. Before we begin, as always, if you are new to this channel, let's give a brief rundown of my approach. Well, first and foremost, I focus on historical authenticity, trying to be truer to history than the game currently is. My designs push the boundaries, but are all implementable. If you see something not implementable in this build, please let me know. And if you want to see some ideas that go well past what the game can currently do, take a look in the LAVAnte-Garde section at the end of the video. Of note, I am a hobbyist, not a historian. I get stuff wrong and have to simplify all the time. The sources that Amiki and I used are linked in the speaker notes of this slide, and all images are credited likewise. And if you want to support me, like and subscribe, join the Discord, support me on Ko-Fi if you have a couple of bucks, the latter two of which can be found in the description down below. Let us move on to the CHONTALS. Who exactly were they? They were a Western Maya people located in what is now modern Tabasco. This was the heartland of the ancient Olmec civilization, and the CHONTALS considered themselves direct successors of the Olmecs. The CHONTALS rose to prominence early in the AoE2 timeframe, and were contemporaries of the early Nahua Toltecs, which, if you've seen my recent video on adding new civilizations to Mesoamerica, go check that out up here, you'll know is a largely mythologized term, but there were still many early Nahua city-states. The Nahua called the CHONTALS the Olmeca Xicalanga, referencing their Olmec heritage. The CHONTALS called themselves Yocotan, which is related to the word Yucatan, of course. CHONTAL itself is a later Nahua loanword, roughly translating to foreigner. The CHONTALS were also closely linked with the Zapotecs in nearby Oaxaca. Yes, I know I called it Oaxaca. The Aztecs would have called it Huaxacac, so my pronunciation wasn't terribly off. The map on screen right now shows where the CHONTAL heartland is and has been for almost all of their history. But that doesn't mean they only stuck to Tabasco. The CHONTALS were somewhat of a bridge between the Maya and Nahua worlds, sitting at the point where the two intersected. They were an incredibly important trade liaison, the first to acquire and adopt innovations passing from one region to the other, meaning that they were often on the cutting edge of both. And they founded and held many classical era power centers, most notably Cacaxtla, which they founded probably in around 600-ish AD, and was one of the most important cities in central Mexico for many hundreds of years. But they also founded Xicalanga, similarly important, a port city in modern Tabasco. Many of their settlements were actually well into central Mexico, far outside of the modern Tabasco region, with some of them even being positioned within spitting distance of the legendary city of Teotihuacan. And the state of Tabasco, with its capital at Potonchan, was a major player after the fall of the League of Mayapan in the 12 and 1300s AD, and actually ended up being one of the first American powers and the first Mesoamerican power to face the Spanish and armed conflict in the early 1500s. So now that we have a bit of an idea about the CHONTALS, let's discuss their history. CHONTAL history, as mentioned, begins all the way at the beginning of the AoE2 timeframe with the founding of Cacaxtla in about 600 AD. This rapidly gave them sway with their Maya and Toltec Nahua neighbors through controlling trade. Everything had to pass through Cacaxtla and the CHONTAL regions, and they were able to profit massively off of that. They were previously a Yucatan Maya people, but began to gain a much more distinctive individual identity, blending Nahua, Maya, and even Oaxacan influences all together. They also weathered the classical era collapse in the 900s to 1000s-ish AD. A lot of people assume that after the classical era collapse, the Mayans just like vanished into the jungles. No, no, no. There were plenty of very powerful Mayan states well beyond that. And in fact, the CHONTALS were one of the biggest beneficiaries. If anything, they flourished immediately after the collapse, founding other major cities like Xikalanko, as formerly mentioned. Though they were driven from Cacaxtla, that doesn't mean that their power waned whatsoever. In fact, they had an even greater monopoly on trade until the early 1200s AD, ruling over a pluralistic society of Maya, Nahua, Otomi, Zapotecs, and many others besides. Now, of note, they were nowhere near a unified empire at this time. They were a powerful collection of like semi-collaborative city-states, but these city-states were all distinctly Chontal, sharing a unified culture, language, and similar. However, in the 1200s or so, they began to lose power. And by the end of the 1200s, they had all but completely retreated into the broader Maya world. It's not super clear exactly why the Chontals were driven away from their major power centers. According to legends, it was a Toltec invasion, but in reality, it was probably a combination of Tlaxcaltec raids, unfavorable economic conditions, and maybe even a major volcanic eruption. Later in the 1200s, the Chontals even joined the League of Mayapan as subjects of the Itza peoples, but this didn't last for long. In the late 1200s AD, the state of Tabasco, where the modern state of Tabasco is, began to break away from the League of Mayapan, and eventually it became a fully unified, independent Chontal state. It capitalized on the weakening League to retain independence, and by the 1500s, it was once again a major player within Mesoamerica, re-establishing trade with the Nahua world and fending off its various Maya rivals. In the 1500s, when the Spanish arrived, one of the first places in Mesoamerica they visited was Tabasco, parleying with the leader of Potonchan in 1518 AD. This seems to have gone initially peacefully, but the year after, Cortés began his invasion of Mexico by attacking the Chontals of Potonchan in 1519, who put up a fantastic fight but were eventually defeated. The Tabasco capital of Potonchan became Spain's first American holding, and I believe was renamed to Veracruz, which is the name it retains even today. So the Chontal defeat was not ignored by the rest of Mesoamerica, because the Chontals of Tabasco were such a key trade player within Mesoamerica at this point that them losing a major war resonated throughout the entirety of the region and shut down a lot of critical trade infrastructure. And the rest, as they say, is history, with the Chontals becoming subjects of the Spanish crown and broadly assimilating back into larger Maya culture from here on out. But where are the Chontals now? Well, I'll tell you, they're still a discrete ethnic group, mostly still living in the Mayan state of Tabasco, where their story began. They are not a very numerous people, but their language and culture is still very much alive, and they still consider themselves the successors of the ancient Olmecs. Now, with the history out of the way, let's take a brief detour to look at flavor, the beautiful aesthetic details that make Age of Empires civilizations special. The language of the civilization would be Chontal Maya, which is tough to research, by the way, so you might have to make a couple of loose exceptions and use some modernisms if you have to. Their ensign is based off of a famous glyph found in the Cacaxtla murals. It is probably calendrical in nature and looks like this. I think it looks absolutely sick. It looks kind of like Heat Miser, if you're familiar. Now, their architecture would be Mesoamerican. What a surprise! And their wonder could be the main temple at Comalcalco, which you can see a reconstruction of pictured here. Very beautiful. Mayan buildings were often painted red. Seems like it would be sick. As with many cultures, it was kind of tough to find a castle for them, but the ever-resourceful Amiki found this awesome reconstruction of a temple at Potonchan, which I think looks pretty damn cool and is castle-ish enough to probably suffice in-game, while still remaining at least somewhat authentic. Moving on from flavor, let's briefly touch upon campaign. Don't have a ton of material here, but there's a very obvious choice to go with. Let's talk about Tabscob. He was the great Maya leader of the late state of Tabasco, ruling out of Potonchan. In fact, the state of Tabasco was probably named after him by the Spanish, who heard the name of the ruler and probably misattribute it to the entirety of the state, and so hence why we still know it as Tabasco today. A campaign about Tabscob would feature the Aztecs, the Spanish, and the Yucatecs, because in addition to facing down the Spanish, he did some brawling with nearby Nahua and Maya neighbors well before. Tabscob's campaign would obviously end in defeat, but he really is the only good option we have for the CHONTALS, so you kind of have to have him be the campaign protagonist. And for other considerations, we unfortunately really don't have any. The lords and heroes of the CHONTALs are not well recorded whatsoever. In fact, Amiki had to really dig to find a couple of AI player names, which you can see on screen right now, but we know so little about them that they really can't serve for campaign protagonists, and a couple are outright mythologized as well. So they should work for in-game AI player names, but Tabscope is really the best we have for a proper campaign protagonist, though I think he would still make for a very cool one. Let's now talk about major themes. Whenever I'm designing a civilization, I try to draw a couple of major conclusions from an analysis of their history to base their overarching bonuses and game plan around. And the first major theme I found for the CHONTALs was them being the cutting edge of Mesoamerica. Like I mentioned, they had an essential stranglehold on trade thanks to their location, and more than just wealth, this gave them their pick of innovations crossing from the Nahua to the Maya worlds, or vice versa. So they quickly were able to adopt new military and societal techniques and reforms, making sure that they stayed ahead of their rivals, especially in the Maya sphere. And therefore, I think it makes sense for this civilization to have a bonus to aging up and relatively high individual unit quality. Next major theme, massed archers behind an elite frontline. Something you will see me reference a lot in this build is one of the accounts that Cortez's men gave of facing an enormous barrage of projectiles from the CHONTALs. They seem to, at least by the time of Tabscope, have had a major focus on ranged warfare. And classical era Maya warfare was probably skirmishing focused in the most part, so this kind of checks out even though it's separated by almost 1,000 years of history. However, we know that in the post-classical era, around 1000-ish AD, the CHONTALs were some of the first Maya to adopt elite, heavily armored infantry tactics from the Nahua neighbors that they had. And so therefore, we had the idea for the CHONTALs to be an archer civ with a focus on quantity over quality, shooting a lot of projectiles, and supported by beefy but somewhat flawed elite infantry. Seems like a great compromise that gives them a unique role among Mesoamerican cultures. The last major theme that I wanted to draw was them almost beating the Spanish. They were a really tough first opponent for Cortés, because in addition to their endless projectiles, the CHONTALs were reported to have been totally unafraid of Spanish guns. But they were spooked by Spanish horses, and so because of a well-timed last-minute cavalry flank attack, the Spanish won the day. And so therefore, I wanted the CHONTALs here to be good against guns and siege, but bad against horses. And with that, we come to the end of the history section. Thank you so much for watching if that's all you were here for. But if you want to see how Amiki and I have translated all this history to an Age of Empires 2 civilization, let us move on to civilization design. Beginning with an overview, the CHONTALs, an archer civilization. First bonus, archers are between 10 and 20% cheaper from feudal to imperial age. This is, of course, a direct port of the current Maya bonus. This CHONTAL civilization is something of a rework of the existing Maya, or at the very least takes a lot of pieces from the existing Maya to be kind of the primary split of that civilization, like the Hindustanis were for the old Indians. And fortunately, the CHONTALs do a great job of justifying one of the most iconic Mayan bonuses, because they were known to have large armies of primarily ranged soldiers. So an archer discount seems like it would make sense. Second bonus, markets may research age-ups, but at a 50% slower rate. This is referencing their quick ascension thanks to being a trade bridge between Maya and Nahua worlds, and I see this as being a less warped version of the Cumans bonus. If you take advantage of it, it can give you some major power spikes, but it will come at the major expense of tempo, meaning that you have to be really careful when you use the market age up, otherwise you're going to leave your economy vulnerable. It will make the CHONTALs very good on Arena, though. Next bonus, completing any building generates 5 food. The CHONTALs had an especially quick urbanization, even among the many powerful Maya city-states, and their population boomed early in the classical era. One of the reasons for this may have been great waste management, which is kind of an underrated but very important element of city design in general, and is often glossed over in the medieval world. And so because of that, I felt like incremental food bonuses as you were developing out your city made most sense for them. Of note, though, this bonus does not apply to walls, segments, or gates. That would be silly. Last bonus, fully upgraded archers fire 25% faster. Very important to bear in mind is that the CHONTALS do not have a perfect archery range. They have a couple of units that are not fully upgraded, but the ones that are ones that historically they tended to favor, such as the Atlatl, which was the ranged weapon of the elite among the CHONTAL army, at least by the time of Tabskulb. This also obliquely references the projectile barrage described by the Spanish. You're flinging tons of projectiles into the air, so firing faster makes some amount of sense. Also of note, the CHONTALs miss thumb ring, so don't worry, this is not just purely cracked in half. Team bonus. Infantry and archers have +1 attack versus siege and gunpowder. Like I said, they were shockingly unafraid in the face of Spanish cannons, and might have even defeated the Spanish were it not for that flanking cavalry attack. And so because of that, the CHONTALs, more than any other Mesoamerican power, is going to have a very easy time of breaking enemy sieges and pulling off archer raids even in the face of enemy mangonels. Also of note, the CHONTALs have access to quite a few regional units. The Slinger, Jaguar Warrior, and Atlatl I all detailed in my Mishtek build. Go take a look at that up here if you haven't seen it before. But in this build, I'm also introducing 2 more regional units, namely the Yashche Plaza and the Ritual Boxer, both of which would be available specifically to Maya civilizations. Let's talk a little bit about their uniques, beginning with their unique unit, the Zabin-Katun. What the heck is that? Well, it is a light archer trained at the castle for 40 wood and 40 food. It is a trash unit, a trash unique. It has rather unusual stats, most comparable to a plumed archer, but a good deal weaker, though with higher range. It also has an additional +1 attack versus infantry, gunpowder, and siege. So if you compare it directly to the plumed archer as it exists now, the Zabin-Katun is a trash unit with substantially higher range and line of sight than a plumed archer and slightly lower overall cost. However, it has a whopping -30% accuracy, as well as less HP, less attack, and slightly lower bonus damage overall. If you were to compare it to another famous trash archer, the Commanderan crossbow, you would find that the Zabin-Katun has more speed, more HP and armor, as well as more range and a little more rate of fire, so it seems way better. But it has way less accuracy once again. It has less attack, it's slightly more expensive overall than a Commanderan crossbow, and it also has a substantially worse attack delay, making it that much worse in micro situations. And the reason for these changes was I wanted to make the plumed archer a little bit more historical. It's a nonsense unit on the face of it, but the Maya were known to use at least some archers in warfare, though not as well-adorned elites. Zabin-Katun translates to Weasel of the Army, a northern Maya expression which roughly means sentinel. Classical era CHONTAL warfare would have lent itself very well to hit-and-run ranged scouts, and they are attested to have retained a lot of skirmishing archers behind their infantry frontline well past the classical era, even to the days of Tabskulb and Cortez. Like I mentioned earlier, the Atlatl was the weapon of choice of the elite. So this is a weaker trash unit, focusing on speed, range, and line of sight rather than sheer firepower. Harrying troops like this were also notably effective versus immobile Spanish gun lines in the Spanish accounts of their invasion, hence why this gets a little bit more specialization against gunpowder and siege beyond the CHONTAL baseline. In Imperial Age, upgrading the Zabin-Katun to Elite costs 700 food, 700 gold, and it gains a couple of respectable stat buffs, though notably it doesn't get any more attack. It's a little tankier, a little more range, a little more accuracy, and slightly better bonus damage. Moving on to unique techs, purists among you might be pleased to see that I have managed to salvage both existing Mayan unique technologies, beginning with Holchak. This gives skirmishers and atlatls a secondary projectile, exactly like the current Holche Javelineers. Holchak, which sounds kind of like Holche, costs 350 food, 350 gold, and like I said, it's actually a shockingly appropriate effect, considering once more the rain of projectiles attested by the Spanish. Spamming bazillions of ranged attacks is exactly correct for the CHONTALs, and I of course wanted to benefit atlatls as well, because that was the preferred weapon of the CHONTALs, and the technology is a little more expensive to compensate for this added utility. Additionally, this civilization misses thumb ring, making their skirmishers just a little bit worse than the current Mayans. The Imperial Age unique technology is called Kakashtla Murals. It gives Eagle and Jaguar warriors plus 20 HP. Much like the above, this is a fix to the El Dorado technology, which is one of the stupidest names in the game, but the effect is once again not terrible. Kakashla murals cost 450 food, 550 gold, so it is cheaper than El Dorado, and it is referencing the beautiful war murals of the Kakashla temple remains. These, along with other sites, place great emphasis on elite Eagle and Jaguar warriors within the Chontali military, indicating their increasing prominence in Chontal armies as Nahua influences grew stronger. And like mentioned, the Chontals are likely the ones who introduced Nahua-style heavy infantry tactics to the rest of the Maya world, and possibly specialized it among the Maya to some degree. They may have even fought as Nahua-style mercenaries for other Maya. Now that's not to say that their infantry would beat the Aztecs, as you'll see their infantry do have some flaws, but it does allow your elite Eagles and Jaguars to serve as that mobile, tanky frontline that the Chontal archers need in order to rain death across the opponent with 1 trillion projectiles at range. From here, we move on to discussing their regionals, again remembering that these will apply to all Maya civilizations going forward. First, the Yaxche Plaza. This is available in Castle Age. It's an economic/defensive building built for 250 wood and 50 stone. You can only have one on the map at a time, and it has a massive 5x5 base. That is huge. For stats, the Yaxche Plaza has pretty decent ones. It's tankier than a town center, for example, and it's built faster than a town center, getting even more tanky in Imperial Age. It also has 20 garrison space, though it cannot attack. This garrison space is very relevant because the Yaxche Plaza heals garrisoned units at a massive 1 HP per second, which is 5 times faster than that of a castle. It also spawns a free villager every 120 seconds. This effect can be toggled so that you don't break your population cap. Lastly, the Yaxche Plaza generates 25 wood per minute for each relic you control map-wide, meaning that if you have all 5, you're getting 125 wood a minute, which ain't bad. So what the heck is the Yaxche Plaza meant to represent? Well, Maya cities typically featured a central square that featured a ceiba tree, or Yaxche in Maya. This served as the axis mundi of the settlement, with substantial religious implications. But beyond the religious side, this likely had an important economic and social function as well, likely serving similar to the Greek agora as a place where citizens could speak, trade, and gather. The ceiba tree itself even has medicinal properties, which may have been another reason why it was given the role of a metaphorical anchor in these Maya settlements. These plazas were sometimes also elevated, implying that they may have served a defensive purpose. I will admit this is a little bit of a stretch, but overall, a very unusual linchpin economic building that'll take up a lot of space in your base, but if you can support it properly by gathering relics, it can give you a major payoff well into the late game, and even if you don't gather relics, its light healing defensive utility and occasional free villagers will help it feel like a noteworthy contribution to your overarching economy, and is probably something you're going to want to build in most games, especially in turtling situations. The second regional, very different from the last, is the Ritual Boxer. Just look at this dude, he looks so tough. This is available in Imperial Age. It's a specialist infantry trained at the monastery for 40 gold. It's a weird cost. This unit is garbage at fighting unless it is fighting near to a monastery or a Yaxche Plaza. Its stats, you can see on screen right now, are very, very weird. Has very high HP, good speed, terrible line of sight, not great attack, but great rate of fire, and it can't be converted until Atonement is researched, but notably, it has no armor, and it has a 90-second training time. So this thing will just get eaten for breakfast by pretty much any decent melee unit. However, it gains a massive +3 attack, plus 33% rate of fire, and 150 HP per minute regen, while within a 12-tile aura of a monastery or Yaxche Plaza. Here's the fun part. Those benefits are doubled within a 6-tile aura, meaning that if you can keep your boxers very, very close to these key buildings, they will eat everything. However, your enemy can also just shoot them. And also, the units take so long to train and are so micro-intensive that I honestly kind of doubt they will be regularly used. Where the heck is this unit coming from? Well, Maya murals often depict brawls between stylistically clad pugilists, likely fighting in like religious gladiatorial ceremonies. And these had some wild equipment that are like directly attested in the murals, like barbute, like full helms, like you see on screen right now, obsidian knuckle dusters, and even conch shell cestus worn on the fists. That sounds so freaking cool to me. These were not battlefield warriors, hence why their stats make them likely to just get ripped to shreds if you actually send them away from your base. And they definitely wouldn't have been many in number, hence the bad training time, but they were way too cool to not include. I see these kind of like flaming camels. They're niche, but they're super fun, and if you make them work, you'll feel like a god. There is room in my heart for just plain fun, and I think this unit will be in that category. From here, we move on to the CHONTALS tech tree, going through it with letter grades, Spirit of the Lost style, beginning with infantry. It's a B+. They miss halberdier, which isn't great. They are weak to cav after all, and they also miss the last armor upgrade, but they have their team bonus, giving their infantry a little more damage versus siege and gunpowder. They have Kakashla murals for their elite Eagle Warriors and Jaguar Warriors, and they also have the Ritual Boxer, though that is niche. So overall, a B+. And you will pretty much never make it to the late game as the CHONTALS without making infantry. Moving on, archers, it's an A. Yes, they are missing a lot. They miss Arbalester, Hand Cannoneer, Elite Slinger, and Thumbring. However, not only are their archers all discounted, but their skirmishers, Atlatl, and zabin-katun all fire much faster when fully upgraded, more than compensating for missing Thumbring. And skirmishers and Atlatls benefit from Hull Chak. All of their archers also benefit from their team bonus, which is much more relevant for archers than for infantry, allowing them to out-micro mangonels much more effectively in the mid-game, and maybe allowing them to snipe enemy onagers in the late game before they can get flattened by a shot. Overall, I think it deserves an A. Cavalry. Siege. It is a C-. It's not great, as you might expect. They have Capram and Onager, and that's about where the good stuff ends. C-. Defenses. It's a C+. The Yashche Plaza is a defensive building to some degree, but this civilization misses fortified wall, keep, arrow slits, hoardings, heated shot, and bombard tower. So they do have architecture and treadmill crane, which is nice and all, but overall, you only want to be playing the civilization defensive if you're trying to capitalize on using their market to age up. C+ feels fair. Navy, it's a B-. They actually don't have a terrible navy for a Mesoamerican power. They have everything fully upgraded besides obviously cannon galleons. They don't have heavy demo ship, and they miss shipwright. B- feels fair. No direct bonuses either. Economy, it's a B+. Not only are you able to age up through markets, which can hypothetically supercharge your economy by letting you churn out more villagers from your TC, but the only technologies they miss are the Castle Age mining ones. They also have access to the Yashche Plaza, which has decent economic implications, and they get a little bit of food whenever they build a building, giving you a nice little cushion that you won't always notice, but will always help them feel that much smoother, and I think will be especially impactful in early and early mid game. B+ feels fair. Lastly, monks. C+. They miss the really important stuff, namely redemption and atonement. They also miss heresy, but they do have the Yashche Plaza, which gives you some payoff for using your monks, and the ritual boxer, which gives some payoff for building monasteries. Bit of a meme, but I feel like a C+ is justified. With their tech tree in mind, let us move on to their game plan. How do I envision an average game going as the CHONTALS? Well, your early game is a B. You get extra food from buildings for the entirety of the game, but it will be most meaningful early, and will help smooth out early villager production and add to timings. Your cheap archers make for a great rush potential as well, and if you want to try to be ambitious, you can go for a cheeky Castle Age at your market in Feudal Age. This leads you to your mid-game, which I'd say is also a B. Your archers are slightly less good during the mid-game because you lack Thumbring, but they're still great for raiding and are hard to counter with mangonels, which is really going to help them in that capacity. You can also start to bring in your elite infantry to round out your composition, and aging up at your market becomes way more viable in Castle Age. If you're playing on 1 TC, being able to produce villagers while you are aging up in the midst of hectic Castle Age warfare could be a huge boon. But kind of like with the humans, you need to use this market aging up thing wisely, or it's going to bite you in the ass. Late game, it's also a B. This is a very even civilization overall. You have your skirmisher, Atlatl, and unique unit making for a fantastic backline with a fast tanky frontline. Overall, your unit quality is quite high, and you'll be able to rip through most enemies unless they have very powerful siege, or they are able to get around you with heavy cavalry. Your late game economy is not that bad thanks to your incremental food games and your Yashte Plaza, but gold will be a bit tougher to secure, and you have a very gold-hungry army. And in addition to this, though you're good versus siege, you have not great defenses and siege of your own, so pushing can be a little bit tough, and you will probably be rather susceptible to raiding, though you will be good at raiding yourself as well. So overall, the CHONTALS have like a very balanced game plan, being decent in different ways at all stages of the game, though they do have a couple of tricky transitions and timings that will take a lot of practice to pull off. They have high individual unit quality with a lot of upgrades packed into some very powerful units, but these can lack punch if your opponent can counter elite infantry and can weather the storm of your archers. This is of course easier said than done, but they will definitely be able to be just plain overpowered, especially by civilizations with strong bombard cannons and knights. Their eco is also good, but not amazing, and their gold problems in post-imperial I think will be one of their biggest late-game issues. And they also have a rather predictable game plan, though they are very good at that game plan. It's like Britons. You know your opponent is doing, but stopping them from doing it is the problem. And from here, we come to the end of the design section. Last up, loose threads, beginning with a couple of uncertainties. I actually didn't have that many concerns with my design for this civilization. I felt overall pretty happy with it, but one that I had was that it might be too streamlined. It has like a very clear game plan, decent at all stages of the game. I just wasn't sure if this was like a good identity, even though it does feel okay historically. It just might be like dull in practice. I'd love to find a way to make their mid-game a little bit weaker to represent kind of the lull period they had during the early League of Mayapan, and probably make the early game a little bit stronger. If I could find a way to do that satisfactorily, I would absolutely jump. Another uncertainty, their ranged death maul might be too oppressive. They can beat siege, and while they are weaker versus cavalry, their atlatl do have bonus damage against cavalry, and they also just have like so many projectiles that you will probably be able to rip through things even that have substantial resistance against you. I was thinking of the Britons post-imperial longbow death ball, which is like an absolute pain in the ass, and I hope that this wouldn't be that bad, but there is a chance it would be. So if it ended up being oppressive, we'd have to find a way to fittingly tone it down. Also, the unique unit and the unique technologies are a bit generic by my standards. I typically like to go for splashier effects, and so normally this would actually have really bothered me, but in this case, I don't really mind as much, because as I mentioned in passing, this build is kind of meant to be like the primary split of the current Mayans, so I wanted to pay homage to them wherever was possible and fitting with history, and I think that I accomplished that pretty well with this build, all thanks to Amiki for that. Lastly, the Yashte Plaza and the Ritual Boxer both feel kind of random and unfocused as regional units. The former is like kind of an eco building, but it's defensive and religious, and then the latter is mostly for memes. I do love regionals, and historically these both fit, but I'd like to find a way to maybe make them a little more usable without becoming too powerful or too gimmicky, though I'm reasonably happy with their current incarnations. To talk about a couple of alternatives to some of the issues I proposed, something that Amiki really liked the idea of was giving the civilization resistance to siege and gunpowder rather than bonus damage. This seems possible to me based on my conversations with my mod squad, but I wasn't able to find a way to satisfactorily implement it. If this civilization ended up being like too annoying and oppressive to deal with, we can swap out the current team bonus for resistance to siege and gunpowder instead, which I think will still be good and strong, just different, and hopefully make the archers a little bit less obnoxious and impossible to crack. Another alternative would be to give the Yashte Plaza a small map-wide HP bonus when relics are garrisoned in it specifically. This is another one that I think is possible to implement, but seems like it would be extremely fussy. And also I kind of prefer the eco angle because bonus HP map-wide is maybe a little bit too warping. Last alternative is to make the food generated on building completion stronger, but only apply it to eco buildings. That could maybe help out their early game a bit more. I was looking for an early game buff after all. And the last thing I was considering is like an explicit weakness against cavalry. Maybe even removing pikemen, which is maybe a little bit too dramatic, or give the unique unit like additional damage taken from cavalry by reversing the royal heirs effect, which I also believe is possible. So I wanted to mention all of these, but none of them I think are on their face better than what the build has right now. And lastly, let us talk about the LAVAnte-Garde section, the impossible, improbable, and often idiotic but innovative ideas that my channel is known for. You can take a look on screen right now. I have a bunch of tech tree ads, including one unique unit idea, a couple of regionals, a lot of regionals, in fact. Remember in the Meso ad video, I was talking about wanting more Mayan regionals? Well, I found them. They're on screen right now. I'd say the one I want to highlight most is Pulke. This would be ported from my old Zapotex build, where it originally allowed villagers to heal like monks, though a little bit weaker, which I actually think is a really cool effect, but might do with a little bit of updating. I also have a couple of tabled mechanics that I strongly considered but didn't implement, such as giving the zabin-katun a stealth or forest walking effect, which is obviously impossible in AoE2, but that's why it's in the LAVAnte-Garde section. Other options that Amiki and I discussed included digging canals and building artificial islands, also super impossible but very cool, and maybe a way to connect this civilization more directly with the Zapotex, specifically because of this one mural Amiki told me about at Xochicalco, showing a Maya glyph and a Zapotec glyph entangled with a rope. Ooh, that's so cool. Maybe there's a good way to reference it. I couldn't find anything satisfactory for it, though. But with that, we come to the end of this CHONTALS build. Thank you so much for watching. Before we end, let's take a look at the Likeliometer. In my opinion, how likely is it that a CHONTALS civilization, maybe looking something like this build today, could be added to the game at some point in future? And on the Likeliometer, we have a 5 out of 10. Not very likely, in my opinion. I do think that a Mayans rework and split into a couple of civilizations is possible, though I think it's pretty far down the line, and the CHONTALS, while they probably would be reasonably high on that list, is unlikely to be the primary split of the Mayans, even though I think their history fits perfectly with the current Mayan bonuses. But that's just what I think. Now I want to hear what you guys have to say. How'd you like the build? Is there anything you would do differently? A huge round of applause once more to Amiki. He is a brilliant consultant who knows a ton about Mesoamerica, and as I said, without him, these Mesoamerican builds would not have been possible. So please be sure to show him some love down in the comment section below, and let me know where in the world you would like to see me visit next in an Age of Empires 2 build. But until then, my name is Robbie Howell, and ciao for now.